Almost. Setting it up. Okay, so.
I'm totally into what you're doing right now, Pete. Just clicking on a button and starting YouTube live. It's just perfect.
So we are live on YouTube and it is 5:08.
Okay. So I guess you want to lead us off, Pete, with what we're going to be looking at?
So this is leftover. I'm keeping this on the budget, on the Finance Committee agenda for the budget priorities and process. I think that for process, what I'm expecting is that we will probably get through a recommended budget by the end of this month. I then foresee some opportunity for some public outreach during the month of April to make sure that we are incorporating the public in the process. We don't see having a budget meeting like we would have had in prior years. We see it happening the exact same way as it happened last year. But
Is that budget meeting, you mean like the public hearing?
the public meeting that we have at the high school, which actually is the budget, which actually is a budget meeting where the budget is actually determined that night. Because we don't have that process, the getting the public input at hearings is kind of more important. And I think that having public hearings, in my opinion, before the board actually adopts a budget to go forward, and actually after the board adopts it. I think that last year we did it, legally, you have the hearings after the board adopts it. This seems to be kind of the way to include the public prior to the board adoption, so you can hear their comments if there are any prior to your adoption of it, and consider those in your deliberations. And then legally, we have to have hearings between the board adoption and prior to the referendum, which will be on the traditional referendum date, which I think is June
8th, second Tuesday?
The 8th, yeah.
Yeah.
Right now, except for Thomaston, we're the only referendum on most of the town's elections. And they wouldn't, if we didn't have the budget, if we didn't have a budget to vote on, they would have had, they will not be having a referendum, except in Thomaston, who has a couple of questions, I guess, on theirs.
So does the board vote on the budget on the 20th of May?
I really would like to see the board voting on the budget, if possible, on the 6th of May.
Which is our regular board meeting.
It's a regular board meeting. That's why I think we can use March to, if it works, if it's possible to do it, to flesh out, the board's requests and get some.
But again,
time.
we do this process through March, and then John comes forward with his recommended budget then, right? And then we have public comment. Is that how you want to do it? John and Pete? Okay.
So I'm just trying to work backward from the set days. So your idea is that you'll be ready to send the proposed budget. Well, it'll be ready for public comment at the end of March.
I'm hoping that by the end of March, we'll have a requested budget and be well on our way to having a budget that we can live with through the process. Get public input in April and board approval the first Thursday in May.
Okay, so who's defining, John, that's a question for you. Who's defining how that input works? Is that going to be this committee or another committee? Or Lauren, it's between you and John.
No, go ahead, John.
Well, I think it's up to the superintendent, the board chair, to determine a format and a schedule for those public hearings. The committee could certainly recommend to the board chair what they would like to see.
Yes.
And Chelsea had sent along information about a kind of a online feedback.
Well, I want to clarify that because I don't want it to be muddled with, it's not intended to be formal feedback in the same way that the board hearings are. It's meant to be something that allows the public to be more engaged in the process, because we are starting to move a lot more to async is the easy way to say that, async comments and things like that. And so for those of you who didn't see my email, the program is something that a lot of cities and organizations are using to get public feedback. And basically the public can ask a question, people can comment on it, they can upvote it, they can downvote it. So it gives a way to not just have like a piece of information like, hey, we think we should do this, but to really get feedback and ideally go into it in more depth. That obviously depends on the people participating, how it's moderated and presented to people. But I think it's something that could really benefit our process. It's not quite participatory budgeting, but it follows some of those same principles of really reaching out to the public in a meaningful way, but also reaching out to them in a way that may be easier for them to handle, because budget hearings take up a lot of time. They are more accessible on Zoom, but if you're trying to put a kid to bed or things like that, it might be a lot easier to go online and review some comments, put some ideas in. So I just think that it helps to broaden how we engage with the public. And I think it's worth doing, and I'd love to do a trial of it this year. Gerald and I spoke about it, and he had some concerns in terms of committee roles and overall policies. I won't say more than that because I don't want to speak for Gerald, but I think it could be worth doing. And it's something that I'm definitely going to explore when I get over my current work hump, which hopefully will be very soon.
I mean, I think anything we can do to engage the public in this process is kind of one of the goals.
Do you want to do it, Pete?
You know, I hesitate because it does seem to conflict with the public with the hearing style.
How about augment rather than conflict?
You know, can you limit it to our voters in our 5 towns, or is it going to be opened up to anybody? I guess there's things that I want to make sure that we kind of engage the right people.
I think you can sort it. So even if you had random people participating, which I don't know why, I certainly don't care about your budget, for instance, but maybe some people do. But I think you can sort it, but I haven't looked into the details that much because again, I want to make sure, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty before we actually decide if we want to do it. But I think those are good questions to be asking. So
I'm certainly open to look more into it and use it if it's a good tool to do that.
What's the platform again?
it's called consider.it. So consider it.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to replace our hearings such as they
Okay.
are with Zoom, but augment, something to look at for sure. Pete, you make a good point, because on some issues, sometimes we get emails from people out of state, and that's fine to participate, but you know, we need to be talking to and listening to the people of the 5 towns on this particular issue or any issue. But
Yeah, I do think I know you can sort it. They mentioned that you can sort it to hear from just your board. So I'm sure they have some sorting potential. I just don't know what it looks like. So, but the nice thing about it is that if you do get people who they can have a back and forth conversation. And so you can sort of see overall how many people like an idea, but then you can also see the people who are engaging more thoughtfully. Although I will say I've seen some examples of it where everybody who's on the platform agrees with each other and it's super unhelpful. So it's not, it's as good as its users. So.
okay. Gerald, what do you think?
I really don't like the idea of any member of the board engaging the public in that platform. If we want to read what other people are saying, that's fine. But I don't like the idea of a dialogue, just an open dialogue like that. Because
Oh, yeah.
first of all, you got the open meetings law. So if there's 3 of us there, then it's a public, it's a public meeting. it's too Wild West for me. Again, if people want to like set up a thing to sit and chat about the budget on their own, then that's fine. But I just really hesitate to have any of us participate in an ongoing discussion.
Oh, I
Yeah,
agree. Yeah, I was thinking it would be public, that we wouldn't participate.
I agree. That's where my head is at too, because those are good points that could get
I
messy.
mean, we don't do that at our regular board meetings. The public is
Right.
more than welcome to come and talk at us,
Right.
but we don't engage in any kind of back and forth.
The only thing that we might want to consider that might be considered engagement is that I do think it would be worth having, potentially, it would depend on the questions, but maybe if there are some questions that Pete, for instance, is interested in polling the public on, we might want to have those questions. But I think that would be something we'd want to talk about, because I agree with Gerald, we don't want to free for all. Anything that would come from us would need to be very carefully thought through. And sort
One
of
voice too. Yeah,
Yes,
one
that's
voice.
that's exactly the term.
So can I leave it then to John and Lauren to come up with whatever is going to be used to
Yes.
get the public engagement?
Yes.
And then it'll just happen, right? I mean, you don't need to come to us for any
No.
anything.
But any ideas on, like, Chelsea, all that, just keep talking, keep communicating with me about that, and John.
Lauren and John,
Jose-
I'll email you guys the link so you can look into it, and then maybe we should have a
Okay.
conversation about it separately.
Okay.
And then I guess the other thing about this is how many of these, I don't even know what you want to call them, are going to be, when they're going to be, who's going to, is the entire board going to be to sit and listen? I mean, again, I don't think, like at the public hearing of the budget at the auditorium, again, there's no back and forth. The public just stands up and says, I want to cut $100,000 out of Article 2 or whatever. I'm just curious. I'm not. Well, I just don't want it to be too many of these things, and I'm just concerned about how much time board members are going to be required to spend at them. And again, no one ever comes to these meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're talking about the public
public
participation meetings in
Yeah.
April,
And that's
which are different than what we do in late May.
Yeah. But even the word participation, it's just it kind of implies that there's going to be this back and forth. And I don't know if that's what your intent is. Again, I'm really leery of that.
Can I ask why?
Because we don't do it at a regular board meeting.
But we would well, I guess I'm thinking more of the council model, but like they have workshops and things like that where they do engage people. So I guess I'm not sure why we wouldn't want to do that.
Maybe that's an opportunity for the April workshop. Maybe we do exactly that. That might be the time to do that. We just have one public, one time for the public before the board puts together its final version, and then we do the ones after in May, which are obligations as part of the process, where the articles are presented, because the articles will go on the referendum like they did last year.
So the workshop would be April 15th.
Wait. John, go ahead. I know you want to say something, John. Go ahead.
Oh, just my 2 cents. I'm very interested in what Chelsea's describing. However, being sort of the watchdog for the district, what I would recommend is that we thoroughly check it out and actually establish a published protocol or policy to go along with it if we decide to employ it. Because what you don't want to do is somehow get afoul of the law in some way, and we're operating under an emergency measure that allows for this kind of a process that we're going to engage in. So I think we need to be a little careful about sort of firing before we aim in some ways, but I'm very interested in it. Don't get me wrong. I think it sounds good. I'd like to know more, and then I think we need to just approach it in a rational manner
Well, it sounds like, so I just sent you guys the information. It sounds like we're not doing any public participation before April. So that gives us a full month to have legal review it and think through whatever the policy implications are.
That's all. That's my only thought.
Okay, so again, we're gonna leave you, John and Lauren to come up with whatever vehicle this is that,
Yes,
okay,
thank you.
all right. Next item, Pete?
In terms of priorities, I also want to, just kind of add a priority of mine, and I guess I've heard the board also, is to make sure that we have sufficient contingencies built into the budget. You want to make sure that we have contingencies, especially for special ed, that we've kind of been cutting back on for years, but I think it's time to start putting those safety nets back in.
Can you provide a quick outline of the ones that you're considering?
Special ed, transportation, facilities.
I think I'm still unsure how the, excuse me, how the March budget review is going to work. Because I definitely, before I'd want to do contingencies, I'd like, for instance, to meet with those, well, certainly with special ed, because we have a new director there. So are we going to have time to be doing that? And then are we going to have the time to, we've been talking about having a chance to actually sit down and have those conversations. I feel like March is very brief and already here. How are we going to fit all that in?
March and a half in April, so it seems like.
That's still 6 weeks. Can we actually do that?
Okay. Also, I guess I think that's, as we start talking about the budget, again, that's, everything's tentative and up to you. But, so let's go back to let's go to the status quo budget. So the status quo budget, forgive me, I had to rush out. It's running late, so I got everything digital. I don't have my physical copy here.
Actually, could you send us a digital copy as well? I mean, not a digital, a physical copy?
A physical?
Yeah, because I don't want to print it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Lauren
think
does.
only if you want it. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to have paper. I don't need.
No, I'm not.
For something as big as the budget, it is helpful for me to be able to write on it.
Yeah,
So.
Gerald came by and picked one up the other day, or 2 weeks ago. He's got his copy, so just shoot me an email and I'll print it out for you and either have it for you or.
I'll send you my address.
Okay, I'll drop it off then.
That's
postage.
illegal to put things in mailboxes.
I hate postage. I hate telephone bills.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah.
It's a leftover from my dad. My dad had things about telephone, especially.
Okay, I'll come pick it up, but I'll send you an email.
Pete, did you send in the budget you sent before, did you put those contingencies in at that time? I didn't see them.
No, that's not. That would be more of a recommended. This is, so the budget that I sent out 2 weeks ago, or I think it was 2 weeks ago now, was just the status quo budget. So it included basically it included the staff that were budgeted for this year, but put in their positions for this year. So that you might see some numbers in different lines off, but it's the same people. It's the exact same number of positions, the same people that were budgeted last year and who are employed this year. It includes, their step and their cost of living increases, or an estimate if there's no contract in place. It includes a 4% increase for anybody who's non-aligned, which coincides with the average increase for the teaching contract. It includes an 8% increase in insurance. It includes any reduction in interest in our debt service. It includes the proposed budget for MCST. It includes any leases that are ending at the end of this year that are not being replaced. it includes a couple of, of changes that I know that I've done this year. Is we've put our copier usage down over the last few years, so I'm just adjusting that. Again, I hate telephones, so I ended up canceling a lot of unused phone calls, and we replaced phones in our security system with wireless radio repeaters, which is a one-time cost, but the payback was like 8 months. So we've done that with that. Again, adjusted some of we've been really trying to cut down our Verizon bills. And then
Is all this summarized on page 2?
Yes, it is. So that's really what it is.
So if you guys could all, you guys all have this digital copy. It came 2 weeks ago.
Right here. Yep.
It's really handy just to look at page 2, because it's just right there.
And I'll keep this up to date. I'll keep this type of format up for every change. So as we go along, you'll see these things being updated.
Yeah, that's one problem I've had in the past is being able to track changes over and over. Because every time we get every 2 weeks, it seems like we get a new budget. So if we can have those clearly laid out, that would be
That's what I'm doing. I've started this from the beginning. I just have a working spreadsheet that I just keep adding to. So
Okay.
So these numbers will track the actual numbers that I have in the system.
I got a couple questions. Maybe this is for you, maybe this is for John, I'm not sure. So, the president.
Doug, the other big change is the change in our devices. We are eliminating the MLTI program is ending, as well as the purchase of our K2 devices, which all expire this year.
What is MLTI? I'm sorry.
That's our the iPad program.
That's what I was going to ask about.
So, and then we're replacing that with a district-wide K-12 lease, non-state funded MLTI, which has a net.
So the savings from the
Yeah, so that's the
savings
question.
from the MLTI is. All right, well, just let me finish. The savings from the MLTI is $245,000, and then the new Apple lease is $325,000. So it's an $80,000 add to the budget, but it updates every device in the district.
Well, it's actually more of a $35,000 update because that Wells Fargo Apple lease.
Oh, the Wells Fargo, yeah.
You got to add the two together. That's those two together represent our K-12 devices, and while the per unit cost is down, we have to purchase more in this next round. Part of it is we have to
$1,000 in savings and $325 in cost.
Right. We have to fund our own replacement fleet. So when devices go out for repair, those were, MLTI used to give us a number for the shelf. In this case, we're going to have to do our own. So when a device comes in to be repaired, it immediately gets swapped out with one on the shelf, gets repaired, and then swapped back. It goes back on the shelf. So we just need to have a number of devices to allow us to do that.
Like loaner cars.
Exactly.
So along those same lines, the way, besides everything else that was presented, my understanding too is when we sell these, we can get a much higher price back. Is that correct?
Right now, the estimate is $380,000. We can't legally put that in our budget because we can. It's not revenue that is guaranteed.
Yep.
It's an estimate, so I'm leaving it out
Okay.
for now.
But if people ask the question, why are we doing this? That's one of the primary reasons why we're doing it. That's one of the question I have for John, right?
Well, we're doing it because these devices are 5 years old. They no longer are supported. They no longer take updates. We were able to get an additional year of support. So we actually got a 5th year of support at a much reduced cost than actually doing that this year. We really were on schedule to purchase these in fiscal 21, but Bruce, with the state, with Apple, was able to get that extra year, which ended up being a cost savings for this year. And then by pure accident, the pandemic has increased the value of our fleet to a point where we may actually see some revenue next year to offset some of these costs, or to go to the general fund budget bottom line.
And I
Could
do
that,
understand.
could that amount of money help with contingencies in any way?
Well, that's in what I put together for a recommended budget. I have done that. So I wanted to, you know, I think that, you know, as long as we, know that we can't really spend the contingencies unless the revenue is there to do that. Whether we, I'm trying to figure out how we can do that,
Well, I don't think you can, put money in contingencies. And I mean, if I understand what Lauren's asking, I mean, basically we can't do it until we have it in our hand, right? So my thought process, we
But
can't.
that's what I mean. That's what I mean is like, if we measure a certain amount of contingency in our budget, but then we're expecting it to be like that in a certain line, certain area because of the sale of these iPads that we're selling,
Right.
then you were thinking we're going to have it and we can then utilize it if need be as contingency, but no, we can't put it in our budget that we're putting out to the voters. I get that.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well. But it would be nice to have an explanation for the public if they ask.
Yeah.
I think this might be a good time to talk about the fund balance, Pete.
Actually, can I ask 2 questions about the budget before we move on?
Yep.
Okay. So Pete, you sent out that email about the insurance coming in significantly higher than you'd budgeted. So does the status quo include that, or was that a different insurance, or what?
No, this version came out prior to that email. So this one, there's another, what did I say, $30,000 that's on top of that. So I've incorporated that into my draft, not recommended, but the requested. Only because last year when I created a second status quo budget, Tom said that doesn't really make sense to have 2 status quo budgets. How can you have 2? So I'm trying to avoid prior years confusions.
Well, it's also not status quo because it is a different cost.
And that's,
and
well,
so-
just a clarification. And so that's property insurance, right? It's insurance on the buildings.
That's property and liability, property casualty liability. And you saw it came in at 24%.
Can you talk about what other companies you've looked at, or what are some of the other offers we're getting, or why we're sticking with somebody who's giving us a 24% increase?
We didn't go out to bid this year. With everything else going on, we also have a bunch of other benefits from that company that others can't offer us, including accident insurance that no other insurance company offers for students and staff or anything that is not covered by their own insurance. We have a $10,000 per incident policy. We have a training program that we use for all of our staff training. So all of our required training, all of our optional training, anything that we create locally. There was a lot of obstacles that really didn't make it advantageous. I got a lot of frowny faces when we talked about changing or possibly changing to to a Travelers or some other company. So we didn't go to bid. We need to go to bid. Probably not for next year. I'll put a protective cancellation again in for fiscal 23. But for now,
So it's too late to go out for bid.
it is too late to go out for bid right now.
And then my final question. So just to be clear, the status quo does not include any new requests. It's just those increases that are sort of normalized through, it's not inflation, but whatever the similar word is.
No new requests.
Okay.
So that kind of comes to what John and I have, and Stephanie and I have been, what the 3 of us have been seeing in our requests from our directors and from our principals is, we've talked about how we're going to look at some of these requests in terms of the term. Is it a 1-year request? Is it a 2-year request? Is it a long-term request, which I consider 3 or more years? Is it something in terms of a 3-year request? Is it going to something that we have to going to be sustainable, that we have to actually, eventually roll into the the general fund budget if we can fund it with a grant in the interim period. All that is also kind of working with the question that we ask for every request is it COVID related? Because we have another bucket of money that we've set aside, I think very prudently, with the ESSER 1 and 2 money, CARES 3, if you want to use Lauren's terminology.
Please do.
CARES 3, I think. This is, so we put this aside because we knew we were more flexible with this bucket of money and could use it into fiscal 23, which allows us some flexibility. If we have COVID requests that are 1 year, we can use the money one way. If we have a 2-year request, we can certainly spread it out over 2 years. If we have a sustainable or 3-year request, we might have a strategy where we put 100% in year 1, fiscal 22, 50% in year 2 in fiscal 23, and then fully funded with the general fund in 3 years from now. So we have strategies that we can use depending on the expenditures. But from what we've seen, I'd say, John, and almost entirely, the requests that we've seen are COVID related in terms of supporting staff or students, recovery of academics, social emotional support for students and staff, as well as any kind of building needs that we might need to just make sure that we have fully functional air quality in all of our buildings and maintain that. So I think that in terms of the budget process, except for the contingencies, I don't think we're seeing a whole lot of change to this budget. I really think that we have a potential of a one-on-one ed tech in special ed. Even that I think can be used. We could be using our CARES money, CARES 3 money for that. So go ahead. You're frozen.
You're back now.
You're back. Gerald?
Yes, remind us how much that is. It's like 3.1 million?
It's about $3 million. We have paid for a teacher at Ash Point with some of that money for the classroom reduction program. And we have one teacher that's being paid for out of Title 5 this year. And those will likely be maintained as well.
Again, you talked about the money that we saved. So again, from my terminology, COVID 1, we didn't spend. That's about 600. COVID 2, we had to spend, or at least get it out there by the end of last calendar year. And then COVID 3 is what we're talking about now, which is like 2.5, right? So that's how we get to 3.1 with COVID 1 and COVID 3.
Correct.
And that does not include if there's anything for RSU 13 at the end of the line related to the current stimulus package they're discussing in Congress. So that could be even more or different, right? So we'll just wait and see what happens there. But
I want to jump in and just say one thing, if I could. All my information with meetings from the commissioners, there is going to be an additional amount of money, which I guess you would call COVID 4. I'm sure it'll be called something else.
COVID 4. Leave it simple. COVID 4.
I can't learn two terminologies, Lauren, but I will acquiesce to your.
Thank you, please.
We can't learn anything more complicated than 1, 2, 3, 4.
Exactly. It just ain't gonna happen, right?
But I mean, it's more than just a rumor, though. I will say that.
Right. Sure.
It's pretty solid that we are going to get another round of funding, which could actually be even more than COVID 3.
Can I ask? Oh,
I had something, but go ahead, and I'll speak on that, please.
okay. I was just wondering, Pete, you mentioned that you're starting to get a sense for these requests, so this may be premature, but do you feel like the COVID 3 money is holding up, or do you feel like we're almost done with it?
I haven't done all the numbers, but I feel like it's holding up. Again, there's really been not, I think as we, the big thing that we're working on right now, that John and Stephanie are working on right now, and we've had a couple meetings so far, is any kind of summer programs. I think that's going to be a chunk, but I think that's the intention of that is to make sure that that's done. I think that putting supports in place for next year seems to be the priority. So there's been nothing outlandish, and I think that sure we could use $1 million and finish the windows at the high school, but I think that's not probably the proper use for this. Maybe CARES 4, but I think that in terms of priorities, I think our students and staff, students especially, is what we're focusing on, making sure that that's kind of the priority.
And making sure that we can handle unanticipated needs and future needs. So
I'm looking primarily to support student learning and student social and emotional well-being. That's what I'm looking at. Those should be, in my opinion, the highest and best use of those funds.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And
So-
we'll have more information at our workshop in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
More
So Diane,
information from
Summer
Stephanie.
programs?
What?
I'm sorry.
Summer
I
programs?
wanted to ask John a couple questions.
Well, let me just state real quickly. So we're looking to, at that workshop this month, we're looking to give the board data about where we are with student proficiency, with student learning, identify needs, and then give a rough outline of what we're looking at for summer programming. So I'll talk about that a little bit in my board report this week.
Okay.
But that's where we are right now. We're sketching out what we're going to do for extended year learning opportunities for students during the summer, and then beyond that to what we need to do for students for the next school year.
Okay, so now I'm gonna jump in on that. So a couple things. The COVID, quote unquote, COVID-3 money that we'd be receiving. Do we have any idea when that might hit?
We've received it.
We have got it. How much did we get? I'm sorry, because I was late getting into this meeting.
2.4 million.
Okay, so my bigger concern, John, is I think these kids are way behind. I think that that's a nationwide trend. I also know that I've talked to some other school districts as well and other states, and many school districts started at the exact same time that we did, and they're extending their school year. And I think it's a wise investment to consider that with this COVID money that we're receiving. I know it has to be negotiated. I know all those things. But in the military, what we do is we send out warning orders of what could be happening, so people are aware of it, sooner rather than later. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think it's probably a much better use of our money right now than anything else that I can think of. Along those same lines, I hope that when we get this data that we have on Thursday night, that we get a real true picture, by grade, how kids are doing and attendance and all the other things that go with it. Because in addition to the social emotional learning aspect of it, I feel some responsibility that kids are not getting enough work on Wednesdays, for example. So it's a tough job for everybody to do, but I think we should set the expectation that I clearly know that kids have missed so much school. And, I just think back to my own time in high school when I missed 32 days because of bomb scares. And we were going to schools on Saturdays, holidays, weekends, till 5 o'clock. We had to make up that time. And I know the state is not requiring us to do it. I know they're not. But I think the parents have an expectation that they're carrying the load here. And I've seen it not only in just our district, but locally in Madomic as well. So I would like to hear something about that as well, because I think this is probably the best use of this money that I can think of. I can't think of any better use of it.
Yeah, thank you. So my response to that is we want to look at the data. We want to do something that's data driven and not based on assumptions. And I think what the board will see is going to be somewhat different than what you might expect. I've looked at numbers, I've looked at the data, Stephanie's looked at the data. I don't believe that simply a blanket extension of the school year would be the highest and best use of those funds. I also think it's problematic in any number of other ways, particularly in light of the fact that we'd have to staff it, and we'd also have to bargain the impact of that with the teachers union, because we can't just patently say that you're going to work more contract days this year and just expect that that's going to be allowable. Now, once we look at data, should the board decide to direct me in that fashion, we can certainly go forward with that. But I think it's not advisable just to make an assumption that that kind of a support or that kind of a thing would be the best thing to do. We're trying to look at what is the best thing to do, and then, you know, give the board the information it needs to make that kind of a decision. So I appreciate what you're saying, Doug, I really do. But I'm not prepared to say that, yes, that's something that I'm going to get behind immediately.
Well,
Let me just jump in
I
and
can always tell you, John, as well. I've already talked to the principals, most of them, about it, and I know they're against it. I know that. So it will be a board decision as to what we think we should do. I know the teachers probably would not be in favor of it as well, but I think at the same time, we have to look for the students and see what we think is in their best interest as well.
Right, but let me just jump in, Doug, and say that, you know, if we just extended the school year, it would not be a good use of this money and taxpayers' money. It just wouldn't. We need to target it because a lot of kids are doing fine, and a bunch of kids aren't.
I'll be
And
happy.
so we go ahead and target. We figure out which kids need what kind of help, and that's what we do this summer. Just extending the year is just not a good use of our money.
Doug,
Okay,
can I ask
so
a quick
Lauren, I
question?
have a question. Have you seen statistics?
Doug, let me ask this question. This
Yes.
quick other things. So it's my understanding that the curriculum has been sort of streamlined so that they're going to be reaching an end of like the core of each of the subjects that they're teaching without really going into the nuance and side paths. Is that about correct?
You're asking me?
No, I'm asking John.
So again, and if we're talking about the elementary school, a lot of the information that we're getting back is that teachers are really, in some cases, ahead of where they have been in certain years. And part of the reason for that, we're discovering, is that Wednesday, they're using that time to plan, to develop lessons and activities, to talk about student progress, to look at data and all kinds of things that are really allowing them to be better teachers and better prepared for the instruction that they do give. What we're talking about is 16 days, 16 days in the elementary.
So I guess we should just wait till we get the presentation on the data.
I would recommend that we look at all information and then look at what we propose to do and then let the board make decisions from there. And
to remember that what we're doing is working. You know, that stay safe, stay open plan from the beginning in August, it's worked. I think like 85% of American kids are at home for their instruction. 15% are like us. They're in the buildings, whether it's, you know, hybrid or something like it. So I feel great about where we are, just absolutely great.
If you look at other school systems, we've been open and in person ever since September.
Exactly.
And many places have not. Many places have been completely virtual, or if they've opened, they've had to close again. And we haven't had a single school closure. Knock on wood.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Knock on everything.
But we're dancing all around it. But because of the scheduling that we've done, the cohorting that we've done, the health and safety protocols that we've followed to the letter, we haven't done that. And Stephanie's also got data on that to share with the board that I've asked her to do to show exactly what we're looking at in terms of cases, you know, the total number of close contacts for the whole district, and she will have that data available too. And it's pretty interesting, I've got to tell you.
John, as part of your report, would you ask the principal at the high school to let us know for the senior class, how many people have completed their community service as well? I know we talked about that early in the year about reducing the number of hours, but would you ask them to see if we could get that for you?
Yeah, I can
I
get it.
jump in because I feel like we're getting away from the budget and we're getting into workshop questions and also questions that we probably shouldn't be asking in a finance meeting.
Well, that's what I wanted to remind everybody and anybody that might be watching at some point or down the road is that what we're talking about now is kind of a parallel budget. We will be having, this committee will begin, its kind of deliberations on a secondary budget that does not impact the taxpayer. It's going to be the grant budget for the COVID-1 and COVID-3 money that's going to be supporting these efforts. The general fund budget, the general fund that's the money is raised by taxpayers is not what this last conversation was about. So
When will we be doing that? Because we're not on the same timeline necessarily, but we do have a timeline because the money has to be appropriated. I don't know if that's the right word. That sounds too formal.
Was it the same question you're asking if COVID-3 money is going to be used this school year? Are you
Yeah.
asking?
COVID-1 money needs to be used basically by the end of fiscal 22 next year. COVID-3 money can be used through the end of fiscal 23. So we have 2 years. We have 1 year on 3 million and 2 years on 2.4 million.
But the question I'm asking is the process. What is the process for the parallel budget?
We're still putting together what those projects look like. So once we put together, and really the big thing is, to me, the big thing is this kind of summer program that we're working on now. What's that going to look like? And then how is that going to look in itself in its own budget? And I think that will kind of start us.
Let me just state, like, we have to approve the general fund budget and voters have to approve the general fund budget. We as a board and voters don't have to approve a grant, which is what COVID is. It's a grant. The superintendent will inform us and take our ideas on how we can use that money. The educational leader, has to figure out how to use that money, and he will inform us. But we have a role in the general fund. We must approve, and the voters must approve general fund.
Yeah.
Not Title I grants, not COVID grants, not other grants. And John, jump in if you want to describe that more, but we really need to know our role. And I talked to him about that and Pete clearly yesterday, because we have to know our role as a board and what we must do and what we don't do.
I mean, aren't we responsible for all the money that's spent in the district, Lauren?
Go ahead, John, if you want to just jump in on that.
Well, again, the board, the superintendent will present to the board the expenditure plans. The board can then discuss, deliberate, and direct the superintendent to do X, Y, and Z. So that's really the role of the board. It's not to approve the grant funding, because the grant funding is there. But when you look at, I will bring forward recommendations and proposal for expenditure of those funds, and within the policies that are already established for expenditures of funds, the board will weigh in at that time. So if it falls within those policies, that's when the board gets to decide the expenditures of those funds.
As a corollary,
like
in
Title
Title I,
Title I.
as
So
a title, what?
Title I, we have about $1 million plus
Right.
every year that we bring to the board and say, this is our plan for expenditure of Title I funds for FY21. But the board doesn't vote to authorize expenditures of those funds.
Right.
That's what Lauren's trying to say.
Exactly. We just need to know our role very clearly when we come to this amount of money and what we're going to do for kids and staff.
So
But we do have a policy. We do have a policy that we suspended, and I heard we were going to bring back, but we haven't done it. But we do have a policy that addresses our role in expenditures. So I think it's a little more complicated, Lauren, than what you're proposing.
Well, that's individual expenditures, but I'll make it more complicated, because if you recall in our budget process, when we put together our articles, we actually have a article that goes to the public in our referendum authorizing the RSU to receive and to spend grants. So we do get the ultimate authority from the public to do that. The board, kind of acts as the oversight.
So Pete, what's the overall impact of the status quo budget year over year? Like how much more is it from last year? And a reminder that this is no ads, it's just carrying forward the status quo.
So the status quo budget increases our total expenditures by 3.7%.
What is the difference between the numbers? I'm looking at page 2, the expenses and the impact.
So you can kind of ignore that impact number. So impact would be, so for example, the dollar increase is the $1.185 million.
Wait,
So-
where is that? Sorry.
Up,
Oh,
up,
wait,
up.
gotcha. On the left of the box.
Anyway,
Okay.
the bottom. So that's the total increase in expenditures of the status quo budget. So if you divide that number into this year's budget number, the $32,095,000, that increase is 3.69, 3.7%. The impact is calculated after you reduce the expenditure increase by our revenue increase. So we're receiving an additional $472,000
From the state?
from the state. So if you reduce that number, so now you're around 7.
It says 2.2%.
700. So that would be if it, so 700,000. A $700,000 increase as compared to a $32 million budget would be 2.22. That's an incorrect assumption because the $32 million is not fully funded by the taxpayer. So that $700,000 increase really needs to be divided. The denominator of that calculation is really what the local taxpayers have been paying, which is closer, which is actually $26 million. So $700,000 increase to the taxpayer compared to $26 million last year actually is a 2.7% increase to the tax. So
And then that
3.7
gets divided up differently between each town.
Right, and that's there. So 3.7 to the expenditures, 2.7 is the tax impact at the status quo budget.
Okay.
John, everybody, can I jump in on something, John? I don't know. I don't think we're going to have it this year. And I got to say, if that's true, I'm really missing it. I have loved the opportunity for your building leaders and your program leaders to come in and tell us their story, where they're at, right now, and their buildings and programs and how it relates to the budget, and just having that back and forth. So I don't know how you feel about that, but I just, personally, I just love that part. The last couple of budget seasons doing it like that. So
I think that's what Chelsea was getting at earlier. Is there going to be time to have that kind of presentation?
Except
We'll
talking
go-
about numbers, not necessarily, I think what Lauren's talking about is more appropriate for board meetings and workshops. But when we talk about it from a budget perspective, it should be
Yep.
focused on the numbers.
Well, no, it is a context of the numbers. And I just want John to address that because it gave us a context of the numbers in terms of what they're doing that is what they're doing all along or any proposed ideas. So go ahead, John.
Well, I mean, we certainly can do that. I guess so my sense from last year when we did that process, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe this is an assumption on my part, but what I thought I heard was that the finance committee / board didn't really want to do that again this year, but we're more interested in, as Chelsea said, the numbers. That being said, I'm happy to have my principals meet with either the board or the finance committee and talk about their programs in their schools. That's absolutely not a problem. So I guess
I
it's,
think,
it's up to you you with a big Y to tell me what you want.
right.
I can make it happen.
So I agree with your point there, and Chelsea, your point that the Finance and Facilities Committee really needs to go through numbers. It is our job. But I think maybe we don't do it this year because it's pandemic and Zoom and stuff, but I just think it's a great opportunity for board and leaders of the buildings and the programs to have an excellent sort of dive into what's going on in each of them. I think without it, we are who, what, that's not okay. We need to know exactly what Ben is doing that matters to kids at Ash Point. We just need to hear from them. We need to know what, buildings and grounds, what are their plans to beautify the district in the summer? I mean, it matters. If we don't have that connection and that back and forth one time a year, we just don't.
I
So
think we
that's
should do
what
it
I'm
year
getting at.
round, or perhaps in the summer too, because then they have a little bit more time because they're not in school every day or in classes every day.
I'm
Just-
open.
Just
It's also a good opportunity for the public in general to hear, for
Uh-huh.
those who want to tune in or watch
Yeah.
podcasts. Yeah. One thing though is it's from what I gathered from what Pete and John were saying earlier is that it doesn't sound like there's much, if any, requests for increase to the general budget from any of the departments. Unless there's like a specifically big number that someone wants to bring, there's really no need for them to come to the finance committee this year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're right. I mean, we're not hearing that special ed's projecting a huge increase like that was true a couple of years ago, right? So if
That
that's what you
said-
mean.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I think we should be hearing from special ed in particular because we have a new director. And so learning about the budgeting process from a different perspective, I think is actually really important for us to know about because that helps us, particularly in a year when we don't have an increase, it helps us create sort of that relationship so that when there are increases, we understand how the budget process is working with Janet. So
we've got 14 directors / principals. And that's kind of where I was that's why I wanted to preface this with kind of where we are with the status quo and what we're seeing in terms of an anticipated requested budget, which is not going to deviate too much from that. I agree. I think that, there are people you're going to want to hear from, like special ed and I think, I'd love to hear from facilities because that's been such an integral part of this last year and will continue to be. I think there's some areas at another school district that I'm involved in, that's all accomplished in one 90-minute meeting. They basically give each person 15 minutes. The board has an opportunity to kind of ask questions to that one person, kind of almost like a hot seat.
Speed dating.
15 minutes?
It's somewhat rushed, but it's a much smaller district, believe it or not, because it's only 3 schools and it's 2 schools with one meeting and 1 school with the other meeting. So it's over 2 nights.
I can't do 15 minutes. I'm
and I don't think
genitally unable to.
But I don't think we need to have every person involved. I don't think you need to hear from everybody. But that's really at your discretion. I can send you each a list, and you can kind of decide on who you would like to hear from. We can schedule those up. But I think that 2 or 3 meetings would probably accomplish, I think, what you would like to accomplish.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that. And John, I'm going to speak to you directly. You know how I feel about relationships. We have to know each other well. We have to feel connected to do our job well. So I just count on seeing these folks at least once a year.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I think it's good too. That's why we moved to the format that we did. And just to remind everybody, we had ended up those meetings just prior to the COVID shutdown.
Yeah.
And then when the COVID shutdown happened, the board directed the superintendent to go in a completely different direction and produce basically a zero tax impact budget.
Right.
So all of that went before, I won't say it got, I'll just say it got sort of set aside temporarily, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I had to really enact kind of austere measures to get to that number. And it
Right.
wasn't going to happen through a collaborative process with all the principals. Superintendent had to be pretty heavy-handed.
Right.
So again, I'll do whatever the board or finance committee directs me to do. So I'm always happy to.
One thing I've really liked is, I know Janet came to a meeting. I know the principals came to a meeting. Having them drop in a little bit throughout the school year means that we don't pack it all into the budget, and means that sometimes it helps to build those relationships, because we're not just seeing them when there's a pragmatic reason to do it, where we are actually able to have a little bit more flexibility. So I would encourage us to actually think about this. Think about what Lauren's saying, but think about it on a year-round basis and not necessarily as a budget related case. Because then when we do have budget questions, we do have that relationship. I think you're right. It's important to have.
Yeah. Yeah. We were doing that before COVID, meaning like I asked John to make sure there was at least one presentation at every board meeting by our team and others too, including like after school as part of the team. So, we'll get back to that once we can get back to that. But I guess what I'm thinking in my mind right now is this month of March, we, the finance committee, we go through things and then, give all the ideas to John, and John submits his budget at the end of the month. But I'm wondering if like in the first couple of weeks in April, if we could have a couple of meetings a week that's invited, we're inviting everybody in the whole board to hear from, principals and program managers. Just pack it all in. I mean, again, I'm used to that in the years I've been on school boards. Is like we pack it in the first couple of weeks of April and we hear from everybody and we talk, we ask them questions. I love the format of like, where are you at? Where are you going? I love that format. I love asking that question of a principal. And it just gives the context of what we're spending money on too.
So I got a couple quick things I want to add. So when you had this discussion, I went out and printed out what you sent me 2 weeks ago, because I looked at it online. I didn't print it out. And one of the things I remembered from doing that, and I'll get to Lauren's point in a second, is that when I remember looking at it, I just printed it out. The special ed budget has only been expended about 55% based on this, what you sent us 2 weeks ago. And so, personally, I was not expecting any huge increase in special ed. That was one of the first things I went to look at to see what we adopted and what we've spent so far, and understanding that we're going to have this other money that's going to be coming in. But to me, I didn't see anything that you gave us 2 weeks ago that was anywhere near like what we spent in previous years as far as costs go, unless I just totally missed something. But I zeroed in on that. And then Lauren, just a quick note, like in April, I'm going to be in Zoom meetings for Rotary. I know at least 8 or 9 times on Monday and Tuesday, and sometimes Wednesdays. So, I mean, depending on what the schedule is for us, I might want to move it up earlier rather than later, because I think it's going to kick off. I'm not running it, but I'm participating as a governor. So I'm thinking that probably I will find out what the time is. And then if we can have our meeting before then, that would be better for me. Just so I just throw that out.
Would it make sense to see if we could schedule the next 4 Tuesdays
I know Tuesdays in March or April.
in March?
March is not a problem.
Starting next Tuesday.
March is not a problem. Tuesday in April is a problem.
I just scheduled interviews for personnel board for Tuesday, which I wouldn't have done if I had known that there would be a potential meeting. But I can't save all of my meetings in advance. But I could do that for other ones, but not next Monday, Tuesday.
Just not the 9th, but the other ones you can?
Yes, because I know about it in advance.
Okay, I didn't know if it was multiple nights.
No, it's just one night.
If either we can do one without you, or we can start on the 16th and do 16th, 23rd, 30th, and April 6th.
I'd rather not be omitted.
We wouldn't want you omitted, Chelsea.
Well,
Thank you.
I got to ask John, what do you feel most comfortable with in terms of your team and talking to us?
Well, I have a couple of questions. So is this just for finance committee members, or are we
No.
inviting the whole board?
Whole board should be invited. We'll see who comes, but it is for the whole board to hear from the whole team. Yeah.
I'm comfortable with it. Of course, I haven't discussed this with any of my folks, so we have to set that schedule up. But
So
Little detail.
what happened to the idea of
There's a-
getting a list of all of the principals, the principals of the schools, but the 14 heads, and seeing who we want to talk to, and not this presentation about their buildings and happiness, but about actual numbers. Because I don't think we need to have a conversation with every department head if there's going to be no increase in their budget.
I think when it comes to finance facilities, you are correct. When it comes to the full board and hearing where people are at and where they're going,
Yeah, I get that
You know,
part. We're talking
okay.
about finance committee meetings now for the next
Okay.
week.
fine.
I guess I'm of two minds, because Lauren knows that I love my folks to have conversations with the board and explain what they're doing, and the public can hear that and weigh in. However, it may be more of a use of time than would be necessary for budgeting purposes, because the budget is really is coming in pretty well flat.
Yeah.
So they're not requesting things that we wouldn't cover with COVID funds. So those monies are not going to hit, those requests are not going to hit the general fund budget. They're going to hit the COVID money. So there's two things. So I'm sure they would love to come have a conversation with board members, but they're not really going to come with any kind of financial request that's going to illuminate a decision in the general fund budget, if that makes sense.
It will
I
get
would-
very confusing, I think, because the conversations will tend towards that COVID budget. I think that every conversation is going to head towards that, because just based on the conversations that we have at our admin meetings, that's where they go, because that's really what's top of mind in everybody is how to support our students. And we're doing that in a different budget this year and next year. Next 3 years, really.
Just to summarize real quick, basically, I'm going to bring in, with the exception of increases that we can't control, a flat funded budget with contingencies added into it. And then pretty much everything else is going to be covered under COVID funds. So that's, in a nutshell, that's where I'm headed.
John, can I ask you one question? The only thing I was concerned about with the budget that Pete sent us was the cost of administration and business office and the administration for the RSU, like the principals and yourself and that sort of thing. That seemed to be elevated to me. There was a larger increase for summer school, but it's a tiny amount. And I didn't know if that was part of what you negotiated with the principals to equalize their pay for their work or whatever, or whatever the reason was. That's the only question I really have, because everything, like you said, is pretty good.
That'll be the conversation when I'm on the hot seat. When
Well,
I'm
I'll put you on the hot seat.
I'm
so
one
you
of those
can
14.
protect your people over there. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, we've been talking also, Pete, about doing cross-sectioning. And so how does that fit into this plan? Because I definitely want to see cross-sections of admin and about 15 other categories, just because I do think it'll help us understand where the money goes.
If
And
you want to send me those, I can create a document that has a lot of cross sections in it. One of
Okay.
the ones I look at, ones you want. I think that if you request them, and we publish something, then we might get more questions from others. Others might have other ideas of what they want to see. I think that it might be a great living document that will help us, again, throughout the year, just to kind of judge, our success in some of these areas that we identify as needing to be controlled.
All right, we'll put that on my calendar. Going somewhere, I can't remember where I was going. Never mind.
So can we get back to the talk about contingency, since that's going to be the thing that's going to be increasing this with your,
Well, it's up to you, Gerald. I do want to nail down the calendar for this in terms of if we're going to have heads, principals and program managers talk to us or not. So whatever you want to do first.
I think we can do contingencies at a future meeting. I think that we can really, once John and I and Stephanie and I really sit down and figure out what those need to be and what they're intended to cover, I think we can discuss that and have a more comprehensive discussion as we talked about.
okay, so I won't even bother to ask for a ballpark number because that's meaningless. We did start to talk about the fund balance, and if you
I think
could,
that's the conversation I think that we can tie to the contingencies at a future date.
all right, so I don't see any need to bring in any department head or principal unless they're going to actually talk to us about no. And I do agree with Chelsea. It would be nice to talk with Janet. Other than that, I don't see any reason for any of them to come into the finance committee meetings.
Agreed.
And Janet's prepared anytime. She could have been here tonight. She
All right.
talked about that.
So I guess if you could reach out to her to see what dates might be better, is that okay with everybody?
So long as it's not the whatever that
No,
Tuesday I'm
it
busy
no,
on.
It will not be the 9th.
or 23rd or something. Does
Easily.
anyone want to talk to anybody else? Any
I think
other
it's
department
too
head?
soon for me to say, but I don't think I will, but I need a little more time with it, so.
So I guess, Pete, if you could send us a list of each of them, each department head in their department, I suppose.
Yep.
And again, it sounds like there's going to be no increases to the general budget from anybody. So again, from a number standpoint, I don't see the reason to talk to them. Yes, Chelsea.
I do think, well, I was thinking about Pete's recommendation to talk to facilities. And I was also thinking we're starting to talk about the facilities audit and things like that. So I think from my from my perspective, it would be helpful to, I've never actually had a budget meeting with the facilities people. So it'd be helpful to actually learn how they budget, how they are actually doing some of the things that a facilities audit will track. I'm thinking things like, how do they do maintenance, plan maintenance things and so forth. I just don't have any idea how it works. So that's a place where I do think it, not necessarily in terms of this year's budget numbers, but more in terms of what are the budget philosophies and practices would be helpful.
No, I think Steve's important. I think Darcy's important. I think the nutrition, we run $1 million restaurant. I think that's kind of an important area to.
Wow, that's a concept. I
Yeah.
haven't thought of it that way in my life.
Yeah, it is. And
Is
Yeah.
that something that we want to do in the next few weeks or?
I'll talk to them and schedule them too. Steve's, this is Steve's first year, as director. He's kind of getting his, feet wet. He's run the custodial side of this thing for a long time. He's this pandemic has kind of created a brand new job. I mean, what he's doing is just, projecting and PPE and cleaning and scheduling. And he's truly a manager of 24 people. But I think I think he, Darcy, Janet, from my perspective, me.
Mhm.
Again, is that something that we want to do in the next couple of weeks or?
Yep, I'll kind of do the business side of this thing. Facilities, nutrition, and me. My staff together. We can come together.
And then is a half an hour going to be long enough, Chelsea, for each of these? Because I know 15 minutes was too short.
I think it would be fine for facilities. I don't know about special ed. That's hard to say.
Special ed budget's not going up much though, right now.
Well, no, but I think because we have a new director there may be questions.
Could we do that for another meeting? I mean, to, like meet and greet or something?
Well, let's plan 30 minutes each one and let's make sure we stay on topic, which I think would help.
I do try. Okay. So now as far as ads that we as the finance committee, and that is Chelsea's facilities assessment, in which Pete and I, we had a discussion about that really needs to be informed our programmatical needs. So it really kind of leads to us having a program assessment. And Lauren had asked me about this, and I know you've been.
I'm losing you. I'm not sure if anybody else is.
I can't hear it
Yeah.
all.
Gerald, you froze there. You back?
Am I back?
You're
You're
back.
back.
Okay, so I'll just say what I said again. So so Chelsea's been talking about a facilities assessment, and Pete and I talked about that. And one of Pete's ideas was that we should really do an assessment of our educational programs so we can see what we have and what we might need in the future, because that's going to inform any kind of facilities needs. So Pete, you've been doing some reading about that.
Well, that's been my recollection of this topic. It really started back a while ago when we were talking about programming needs and really assessing our facilities based on our programming needs. And it's been kind of morphed into a facility study, which is more of an actual study of our facilities in terms of condition and maintenance and long-term
Capital expenditures.
I guess I just wanted to, in a way, a contingency in that article would potentially cover a study. I just want to, at some point, have a really in-depth discussion about what really is what is the definition in your minds of a facility study? Is it programming? Is it capital planning? Is it both? Because
I guess both.
Yeah.
programming is a pretty daunting task, I think, because that's going to bring in, it's going to involve everybody. It's going to involve every single principal, assistant principal, teachers, in terms of, directors.
Can I just say that you're giving me a heart attack right now?
I knew it would.
Well,
I knew.
Well, that's why
Oh, he did.
Nope.
John didn't know this. Oh dear.
Well,
part of this is to actually hire an outside consultant.
No, you gotta leave that to John. That's gotta be John's decision.
I mean, if you want to look at the condition of the buildings and capacity of buildings and future maintenance needs and all that, that's great. But
that's my job.
seriously, you can't ask me to do a full-blown program review right now. I mean, I would be happy to do it, but God, guys, come on.
We're just budgeting for it. We're not.
We're just trying to get a line item.
That's why I wanted to have this conversation. Why Joe and I talked about this. I'm all for, and it should be a requirement of having a capital plan and a long-term plan for our buildings. And that's what I would like to just, when we talk about facilities right now, that this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about a full-blown programming related facility. I'd like to kind of narrow the scope to the buildings and conditions and capital planning.
So can we put a line item in the budget, in the requested budget for this? So at least we have something. So rather than talking about it for another year, we can actually act on it.
We can do that, but I think that really a lot of this is we just go to our vendors and they put those together for us. I think G&E Roof, our roofing vendor, puts that together for us. We have a roofing binder for every school already. It just gets updated. I think we just need to go through and Steve needs to assess our buildings and kind of walk around and get vendors out there and put proposals together.
That was my question, because reading through the facilities audit, it seemed to me that it was more best practices rather than something. It felt to me that we should have all of that in place already, and that should be part of what the manager is reviewing for budgets. So I wasn't really sure why we needed it rather than why we aren't doing it.
Well, we are doing it.
Okay, so in that case, going back to where we started this conversation, I agree. The conversation came out of saying, what are we doing with South School? And we can't determine that unless we know whether or not, at that time. And John, let me be clear, I'm not putting anything on you. I fully expect that any of this would be taken care of in a reasonable time after COVID. But so we were talking at that time about possibly having some of the South School being used for special education classes to provide services that we were currently sending out of district. We were also talking about the conversation we're continuing to have about what we're going to do with admin space. And then we were also talking about a project that we sort of started with COVID money of moving some of the South School students over to that building. And, oh, and CDS is the other thing. So I feel like we have all of these ideas, and it's really what I'm thinking about is that we really need to make a decision about how we are using our space. What are the needs? What are the holdbacks for us being able to use it efficiently? So whatever we want to call it, I don't really care. But that's my goal, is for us to be able to really make some decisions. And we have to make decisions about the admin space. So I don't want to see us making decisions in pieces, because they all play a role. And, you know, things have changed since we last thought about what South School was going to be. And I think we need to really take into consideration how we're going to use those spaces, particularly before we go and rent admin buildings, or as the mayor is often saying, we go and build another building, which I'm not recommending.
A master plan.
Yeah, well, add before care and after school
Oh
program.
yeah, there's that too.
Yeah, so it's even added, you know, in terms of what we're kind of expected to be providing now, even in the last year since COVID. So, okay.
Well, I just will respond to that by saying we were absolutely headed there before I got hit with a global pandemic. I mean, that was part of our original plan for Schools of Our Future. And we got hit right in the face with this situation. So I still plan to do that. We need to do that. We just sort of need to be kind of sensitive about how we go forward. I mean, I think it might be reasonable to put out an RFP or an outfit who might look at space and facilities and give us some suggestions, programming, that type of thing. I absolutely don't feel that we've got capacity to do it on a system-wide level right now, which is what I was thinking.
You mean your own staff?
We're going to have to do it for at least the central office space and the technology department, for sure, because of a number of factors. You know, the fact that Rockland is now very interested in taking over that building, and I understand that. We'll do that, but I don't believe we've got capacity to do a full-blown program review and facilities review for the whole district. But South School, probably.
When
Can
you
I
say we, you mean your own staff?
Yes, our own staff. I think it would be
Yeah, that's-
reasonable to do an RFP.
That's why I'm really wanting to have an outside consultant do it.
Yeah, I think that would be a good use of our resources and time, because that'll take up enough of our time as well, even just having an outside company come do it as opposed to us.
John, I'm curious, if we were to just do the central office space and the technology stuff, how would we do that in isolation from these other factors?
Well, nothing's done in isolation. We're going to have to do what I'm saying is we're going to have to do some version of what it is you're talking about. I just want to make sure we don't bite off more than what we can chew.
And I want to make sure that we don't, you know, take it in so many pieces that we're not able to, that we end up having to revisit questions later. Because I'm thinking about the whole South School. I think we moved students into a space that wasn't quite appropriate. And now we're going to move them back into their old space. And I want to make sure that we're really thinking through those decisions as carefully as possible. And I totally agree. We don't want to put too much pressure on staff, which I think is really where this is coming from, is to say, I'm echoing Gerald here, but let's get a consultant, minimize the amount of impact on staff, but make sure that we are able to make the decisions that we need to make with as much information as we can do, and as responsibly as we can do it.
Chelsea, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So where did you get that information?
What information?
You just said that we're going to be taking kids that are in, I assume, the old South School and move them back into what would be the old middle school. Where'd you
We
get
just-
What she's talking about is that for a time when we first moved students around, we had some appropriately configured rooms near the new boardroom for some students that we temporarily move there, but move them back into their primary schools for equity and for.
Actually, that wasn't what I was going to talk. Why don't I answer the question? I'll answer the question. What I was talking about was the new bathrooms we just put in the old 5th grade wing. So, I mean, Justin has been talking about potentially moving the kindergarten and 1st grade into the 4th and 5th grade wings. I think I have all those details right. And we spent some of the COVID money to actually put bathrooms in those rooms. So we're sort of moving forward on a project, but we don't have a larger plan for the project.
Okay, because I thought what Pete's talking about is something else is what I'm talking about.
Well,
So-
right. I have no idea what Pete's talking about. That's not what I'm talking about.
So I'm going to step in again and say, I agree that we should look at South School campus in particular in terms of usage. And I also agree that I think we ought to put out an RFP for an organization to come in and look at that. So I'm not disagreeing.
All right. If I may, I want to go to another topic of long-term facilities.
So do we want to budget money for it? That's what's the conversation.
It
We wanna-
will be there most likely as part of the contingency discussion that we have.
Yes, Lauren, your other subject.
Right. So in terms of long-term facilities and COVID money, so I just want to say it's not surprising, but if we get significant COVID-4 money and it includes something related to ventilation, we've got to look at the high school, because if we can, we'll save local taxpayers a boatload of money because it has to be done at some point. So I'm just putting it out there. We'll just see what happens with the parameters of COVID-4 money and what it would do.
And I've had them up here. We have a new updated estimate on that whole project, so they're ready to do it if that ever happens.
All right, so to continue on with a possible board add to the requested budget, do we want to put in a line item for a PR and grant writer position,
Development
Okay.
director.
development?
It's got to be, in my mind, a development and public information person or specialist. But because John, if you want to talk about the grant writing thing, because you really educated me, you schooled me yesterday about how that does or does not work in a school district, the grant writing part.
Well, a grant writer really needs to follow the mission and vision of the school system and not simply go out and look for funds to justify their job or pay their salary. I have worked in a district, I will not name, where such a position was created, which really caused a lot of strife and almost havoc in terms of new initiatives coming into that district that seemed to be very little connected to what the mission and vision of the district actually was. That being said, someone who can assist with the preparation and application of grants that the superintendent in his designees or her designees decide on would be invaluable. But what I don't want the board to think is that a grant writer is going to bring in money that's going to greatly offset local contribution, i.e. taxpayer monies, because it won't do that. Grants for school systems really require matching funds and matching efforts. It's not going to offset taxes. What could potentially offset taxes would be someone who oversaw fundraising campaigns, capital fundraising campaigns, and that type of thing, so that a project that we did, so for example, if we wanted to renovate the auditorium, we could have someone manage a capital fundraising campaign.
The high school auditorium.
Right, and then we wouldn't have to spend money out of our local budget to do that. So I just want to be clear that, when we say grant writer, a grant writer is not going to bring in revenues that are going to offset the need to raise monies locally.
Yeah, let me just follow up and then I gave you a chance, Chelsea. So That's why I would like this to be in the budget. And I would like it to be a development and public information specialist, because we do need development work. We do need to do things like renovate that auditorium, and we shouldn't have to go to taxpayers locally. We should be able to find ways to fund that and get it funded, because, you know, Rockland needs another big venue. It really does. It would benefit by it, and it benefits our kids most of all. Second thing is, we're a modern school district, and now with a modern website popping up, we need modern public information, someone doing it all day, half their job. Because John does a heck of a lot on a Facebook page, but he can't do it all. And kids and staff and our programming and our schools should be highlighted every day so that people know what's going on, parents know what's going on, prospective families know what's going on. That is a really important part of developing our district and our mission and vision. Chelsea next.
Yeah, it was
Chelsea.
my turn. I think I've never thought that the grant writing position would offset tax revenue. I think that's unrealistic. The goal, in my mind, with a grant writer, and I agree, John, it requires management, and it requires making sure that that position is aligning itself with district goals and not chasing random money, because that's I think that I've talked to a couple of grant writers just with other projects, and I think there are two schools of grant writing, and there's one school that says you just bring in money, and then I think there is another school that actually does exactly what you're talking about, which they evaluate the vision, and then they go and look for money that matches that vision, and they pull it in. The reason I think that's so important is that we are limited in our tax base, and that means that we have so many struggles really trying to meet some needs that we just can't do through our tax base. And that's where grant funding comes in, because the development piece is important, but that's separate from the grant writing. The grant writing is really augmenting these particular needs and kickstarting programming that we can sustain, obviously. But I mean, if you look at some of these major foundations, they are giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to school districts to do programs like SEL and things like that. Some of the stuff that we are actually funding through our tax base. And I think that from my perspective, we should have a grant writer who's looking for those opportunities. So I wouldn't support the position if we were only shifting it to development and PR, because while I think those are important aspects, I don't think that those are going to be the sort of game changers and really meeting the needs of our students that I'm looking for in that position.
All right, I'll throw in my 2 cents worth. So in a previous younger life, right, I had both of those jobs, okay? And with the exception, I will say the grant writing thing, I didn't do a lot of grant writing, but I certainly looked for grants and I looked for opportunities for municipalities, let's just say. And also working for the state, I also reviewed grants. So, I mean, I've seen it on both sides of the aisle. But more importantly, as a public relations officer for the Army, you know, I would be talking to guys like Stephen Betts, right? In external communications. I would be talking to the local press. I would be doing press releases. I would be doing television spots. I would be doing radio spots. I would be doing reports. And more recently, they're updating Facebook pages and some of the websites and things like that. That job alone is a full-time job. And, you know, the message that I would want to put out would be telling the story of our district and how we're doing. And I think sometimes what happens is when you get wrapped up in development and grant writing and all kinds of things, we've had a lot of teachers write a lot of good grants for a lot of different small things. I mean, small grants, not large grants, but small grants. The idea being that this person is going to coordinate with community players, so like real estate agents. So you know what? Rockland is a good place to come. Owlset is a good place to come. You don't have to go to Rockport like my next door neighbor just did, okay? Those are the things what a good public relations person does. And that tells John's story. So John's time is not wrapped up. You know, you go on TV every day, you know, you'll see, what's her name, Jen today, whatever her name is. They took off for Biden. You don't see Mr. Biden on every day like you saw Mr. Trump. You see his public relations person. And that would free up some of John's time, but they got to be on the same sheet of music of what they're doing. You have no idea how much time to do that job well takes. It takes a lot of time. And so from my perspective, I agree with Lauren. I think we should hire somebody for this position. We have to pay him fairly, okay? Whatever fairly is. I have a figure in my mind, but it's also based on some experience as well. And so the thing is, you have to decide as a board what you want that person to do. If you want them to be a public information officer for the school, that covers a whole lot of different areas and things. And then also to help write grants or to selectively write grants or whatever the case is, or go raise money from other organizations. Those are all things. That's a big job. It's a huge job. So from my perspective is you have to really narrow down what you want this position to be, because you can't just willingly say, I need a development officer, I need a public information officer. It's just not going to work. It's not going to work. No human being can do it that well. That's my opinion. So that's from a person who's done some of this work. So I think it's really critical we ascertain what we want this person to do. And personally, you could combine them, but you got to limit one thing or the other, because they can't be all things to all people. They cannot.
So just in response to that, Doug, I just think that a modern public information specialist isn't doing television and radio and writing press releases. It's not required. You know, John is the spokesperson.
We're talking about internal public communication.
John's a spokesperson. You got to keep that, you know, as it is.
If you hire a public information officer, Lauren, he could be the spokesperson for John.
Yeah, no, I disagree with that. I've just stated my opinion. I think that the superintendent is the voice, but we need someone to be able to manage Twitter and Facebook.
Communications is what you're talking.
No, Twitter and Facebook and everything that is public, as well as not even
That's all internal communications.
No, it isn't. It just isn't, man. Facebook is where it's at. Facebook is everything. And Steve Betts does wonderful stories and people read them, but Facebook is where it's at, and some other social media too. And, you know, someone who's splitting their time between getting money, whether it's grants or development, both, and the other half of their time is making sure we have a great message going out through social media. Bingo.
Okay, so if we do have a job description of some sort, or at least an idea in our heads, can we go ahead and put in a line item for this position?
Yes, I would say yes. I would say we should ask the superintendent to do that. We've literally talked about it for years, and I think now it's time. And if we do that, we all need to be on board to defend that to each other and to the public that we're adding that.
Pete, what was the status of the job description? Because I would like to see it just because I'd like to see how this conversation actually shakes out in what we're advertising as a job. Because if it does get more to the development PR side, I become less supportive of it. So I do want to know a little bit more about the final job description.
So I had a draft.
Chelsea. What's the third side you're thinking of?
Just go ahead. Let John. Go ahead, John. Go ahead, John.
Well, just real quick, I had a draft that was given to me, and I'm not entirely sure of the source, but I looked at it and I have.
It was me. I just put something together. That's all.
Okay. Thank you. So it was actually pretty good, and I revised it according to what I thought or how I thought about the position operating. So it might be wise to take a look at that. Gerald has it, Lauren has it. You could disseminate it. That's up to you.
Yeah, go ahead, Gerald. Send it out to.
I was asked to give my input, and I did. So that's where I stand on that. And again, this is not new. This is something that we've talked about ever since probably 2016 or so, I would say.
So again, let me ask Chelsea the question first, but if we at least get the line item in there, we can talk about it when the requested budget comes to us. So we can.
That's fair.
Yeah,
I don't have a problem with that.
But when you read the job description, there is a development side and a PR side, but you're talking about a third side, and I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, I'm talking about the trick with development is that it often tends to be things like auditoriums and sports, which are very important. But as I said earlier, my goal with this position is for us to be able to really meet the needs that we're not currently able to meet in the local tax base and be able to find those pots of money that really enable us. Just as an example, Jess Yates was talking about special ed stuff that she would love to do, but required startup funds. And so there was this gap between what we had and what we knew we could do and the needs we could meet in a different way, more effectively, but we didn't have anything to bridge that gap. So the grant writing position for me is somebody who bridges that gap and isn't looking at the things like auditoriums and stadiums, but really looking at the social, emotional, and academic needs of our students, really more probably the social, emotional. No, I don't want to go that far. It's meeting those academic and social, emotional
I
needs.
think that's what John is saying, Chelsea.
I think that I'm hearing different things from different people. And so that's why I'd like to hear what the final version is.
If I don't want to put words in your mouth, John, but what I'm hearing you say is you're not just going after anything, you're going after specific things.
Correct. I mean, to me, that position would support the mission and vision of the district, right? So if we want to increase our capacity in social and emotional learning, then the superintendent would direct that person to look for sources of support in that area. And I would review what they find, and then we'd make a decision on whether to go after that source of funding or not, right?
Yeah, that's a good policy, and that's good management. So
Yeah, and the superintendent is in charge of this person always. And you're right, Doug, this is a job that, 3 people could do, 3 different parts, but the superintendent would have to say, why don't you go do that now, and do that then, and do that then, while you're maintaining, social media presence.
It might evolve into a 2-person position, and maybe the development person is bringing in enough money that we can fund that, but
Yeah.
I mean, the way I look at it is a couple things. One, I think we'd be extremely lucky if we found someone that had that broad of a skill set.
It'd be amazing.
That would be
It would be incredible.
It would be absolutely wonderful, but I think it would be.
Yeah.
So I kind of see this as being phased. So maybe the majority of their time would be spent doing PR, managing the website, helping to get out press releases, doing stories of things going on at the school. But there might be times where that position shifted to supporting initiatives to get grants. That's the way I would look at it.
I think that's a good way. I think it's a great way to look at it. And just from my own personal experience in college, one of the things I did for the National League of Cities, local cities paid me to help them find grants in specific areas. So I would go research those grants and I would send it to the city council and they would decide which ones that they were interested in, which ones they were not. That's kind of how it went. It went through the department heads, obviously, but I'm sitting in Washington, D.C., and I'm sending stuff out to Toledo, Ohio, and California and say, this is the federal money that's available for this type of grant. This is what it's for libraries or whatever it is, firemen, whatever. It's up to you guys to decide whether or not you want it. I'm just finding it for you.
Right. And
I guess my feeling is that if it's more of a PR position, I don't think this is the right time to fund it because we are in the middle of a pandemic and we're talking about a tax increase.
Chelsea, in all due respect, I don't think it's the right time to have a $15 minimum wage during the pandemic either. Okay.
Can I finish? And can you
just
not bring up my husband's policies? We're talking my policies. If it were more of a PR thing, I just don't think this is the right time for it. I think that if we were to use it to leverage needs and really prioritize that, that's something I think is very important right now. So I think for me, the prioritization, I would flip it to money versus PR. And I know you guys who've been on the board longer have been talking and wanting this PR person for a long time, but that's never struck me as being something, I don't feel like that's as big of a need.
Every time I read a story about some student in another district and I don't see a similar one from our district, it really bothers me.
Yeah, I certainly agree we could do better. But I also think that we have the higher and best use of our funds.
Well, that's in part we're like any other business where we need to advertise and we need to attract people to come to our school district. And this is part of it, is that advertising angle.
Well, we need to be like another business and earn money. So the grant writing.
But yeah, it's just, our customers, if you will, are the students and more attractive. And that benefits So it's
So take a look at the job description. Gerald, if you can make sure that Doug and Chelsea have that too.
already sent.
All right.
And can I send Pete a recommendation for a salary?
I was just gonna ask that, if you would if anybody in their research has some research on salaries for these positions, I mean, I have my own, but I don't want to really get into numbers right now. But I'd be interested in what you consider reasonable as a budgeting figure for this position that you're seeing the.
So I just want to assume that with benefits, it's going to be another 25%, whatever, on top of the salary, right?
Probably in this income range, probably 20.
20, okay.
Gerald, I think it didn't send the attachment.
No, I said hit the include. I'll make sure you get it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I know I'm getting hungry again. So how are we doing here?
Just now?
Finally, I think and we don't need to go into it right now. Because you just got it today. I put together the month end or the interim month end for February, sent it out with the agenda. It still shows that we've got a very strong financial position this year, that we're underspending our budget as expected. No changes, nothing to really point out right now. I haven't really had a chance to look at it, but bottom line, it still looks good. I'll let you look those over at your leisure, send questions if you have them. You'll get an updated one in 2 weeks.
So anything
right.
above 69% would be overspent. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then Pete, you're going to send out a list of the 14 heads.
Yep.
Okay, and then we can just.
And we'll plan on starting 2 weeks from today.
2 weeks from today. So,
And-
so-
And if
I
it's
want
okay,
to,
if it's okay with you, Pete, or Gerald, I'll send you the dates that I'm meeting between 6 and 8 in April, because they change from day to day a little bit.
how's your French coming along, by the way?
so
So good.
So again, just so you know, like I don't know, John, if you feel like on the 29th of March, which is a Monday, you can submit by then your recommended budget. But if we could start, if we decide to go this route, if we could start with having 4 meetings with principals and program managers right after that, like a Tuesday and Thursday schedule, we could finish by the 8th. Or differently, we could finish by the 15th.
And that's more of what's going on in our building or our department.
Where are you at and where are you going with your kids in your education, in your department? Yeah, because by then we've finished our work as a finance committee on all of our work and recommendations to John that he will take in to create his budget for us to consider as a school board.
I
Right.
see no issue with submitting a requested recommended budget by the end of the month.
Okay.
I-
So you and I will talk then about more about, principals and program managers. I just want you all to know that that's what I'm thinking.
And then you're also going to take care of this public participation thing, whatever that's going to be,
Yeah.
you and John.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So that has to happen then after the middle of April, basically,
April.
within all of that.
All right, so I'm going to leave it in your hands and it will happen.
That's my job.
Anything else?
I'm going to turn off the YouTube feed.